Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, giving honor to the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, we intend that it may be long, but nonetheless, it is in due respect, brothers and sisters, that this presentation is done. I do not claim to know everything, brothers and sisters, and at the same time, I am open to constructive criticism. I want to, on a human level, give due respect to my teachers, they who have passed away, Mori Yosef, Rabbi Yeshurun, Cohen Lewi, Nasi Kamul, and many, many others. I want to give due respect to the teachers that I were under who are still alive. That is in part Kohen Mikael. That is in part brothers and sisters, Ima Naami. Brothers and sisters, as those who do know, I have written Hebrew books. Now, while this being the Shabbat, this is not the time to try to quote play salesman. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, I want to give due benevolence and respect to my Hebrew teachers who have passed away. Adon Naharon, More Tibak, as well as More Mishael. As those who do know, a brother wrote history books. I want to give due respect to my history teachers who have passed away. That is to say, Chisimian ben Yahuda. So, brothers and sisters, I had this scheduled to be at 9:05, and currently it is 9:03. And so I just wanted to use this prelude, if you will, to give on a human level due respect to my teachers, brothers and sisters, in this particular case and in this particular realm, if we will. All right. Now, for those who are listening, I appreciate it. For those who like and comment, I give you due respect as well. I have it to where it's set where it's not for children, or quote, not for kids, as they say. And in that, brothers and sisters, the people are able to leave comments and so forth and so on. All right. So we just want to sit there and state that for reasonable purposes. I'm still learning some things regarding the actual StreamYard. So as time goes along, I've recently learned how to do interviews. And I see Dorayo Bendora. So the brother stated that peace and blessings, and I say it right back to you. Peace and blessings to you. All right. For whatever some reason, me being a youth when I was a child, and the understanding of Israel just flashed through my mind. And I remember hearing how people who were not in this way of life, of knowing themselves as Israel, and the commandments that we see in the Torah, one of the things that just ran through my mind is how they used to describe how they used to make lobster. And it would be alive, and then they will put it in the water, and then it would die while being boiled. Now that right there, though it's not seasoning a kid in its mother's milk, why then would you want to sit there and do something in that particular case? For those following the portions, you know that the portion about Leviticus 11 in the diet is going to be read by many Israelites in the morning time. And in that, we are told that we are only to deal with sea creatures that have fins and scales. So we already are given a diet in the Torah. We are given about laws, statutes, commandments. We are given things about how to deal one with another. Case in point, loving your neighbor as yourself, which is already implied that you already love yourself. You understand? So these are just things that we want to point out for reasonable purposes. Shout out to Bathsheba, and shalom to you too. Okay. Brothers and sisters, this particular presentation, if I can be heard, let me get a 1, because I can't hear myself unless I turn my phone up. Well, I do hear myself if I turn it up. All right. But nonetheless, brothers and sisters, what we want to do in this particular case is get into a presentation, continuing on where we left off, say from last week. All right. For those who've been following, we're getting into the aspect of history, linguistics. And in this particular case, we want to sit there and talk in part, say, about showing the images of the ancient people in the ancient world. All right. Now, as we already know in Genesis 50, that the Israelites was mistaken as the Egyptians. All right. So that should tell us right there on certain ways on how the Egyptians looked, even as much as they portrayed it in their own artwork, and by default, how the Israelites would have looked in that particular case. When the Bible speaks about King David, and actually say before he became king or so, right? There was a person that was inside of the land of Israel, and David asked him, where are you from and who are you? And his response was that he was an Egyptian. So one of the things to point out is that in the Israelite literature, that is to say within the said Old Testament or the Tanakh, you don't find it to where they find racial epithets like the Talmud and some of the other aspects saying that Ham was cursed with becoming black, or the aspect that black people got big lips because Ham lied, or any other kind of weird concept that is not scriptural. We do not sit there and see that within the scriptures. All right. Those kind of things. So we want to definitely let it be known the distinction between the two and that manner in that particular case. So I want to send a link to and send a message to somebody, please, if I can. All right. Thank you for that. And I asked the people to click like, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell so that way you know when we'll be going live. All right. And so we call this one here 20 through 40 of 100 slides on archaeology and history. All right. So without any further ado, let us begin to start in this particular case. All right. Okay. Pictures of black people throughout the ancient world. Now, for those who are following last week, you know that this is where we had ended off. And this is where we want to pick up in this particular case. All right. And in doing so, we want to state that the European, that is to say, the said white people, for the lack of a better term, really came into the world circumference on their own volition, save through the era of the Greek Empire. All right. So when you find the matter of the Persians fighting with the Greeks, that is when you begin to see such things. Now, yes, in ancient days, you had it to where there were black people inside of Europe, just as much though a minority, you had it to where there were white people inside of Asian and African places. All right. Now, the area that we'll be talking about is in many cases the area today referred to as the Levant. Some refer today as Palestine. We want to point out that the terminology of calling that land there Palestine was the work of Hadrian of Rome. All right. Hadrian was the person who tried to make sure in a matter of the war between 135 and between 132 and 135 CE or 132 to 135 AD, that the Israelites were not to be going back into their land. So some things we want to point out. You had, brothers and sisters, the Kittos battle that was fought in the era of 115 to 117 CE, the Common Era, or AD, as some people refer to it as. And in that, those were the Israelites that was in present-day Libya and in Egypt trying to get back into their own homeland. So by trying to erase the memory of Israel was the work of the Romans. All right. They were very much influencing trying to do that. The Bible in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, described the Romans as the fourth kingdom that tread down the earth and broke the earth in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet. So it's not too hard to figure out exactly what that is and what that's talking about in that particular case. All right. They wanted to rename things. They wanted to sit there and make the world according to their own image and their own likeness as well. Now, during this time of the rise of Rome, while we're going into an intro about what we'll be talking about, they, brothers and sisters, was responsible, if we will, for making sure and have it to where everything was going to become Latinized. Just like their previous empire before that was Greece, and they wanted to Hellenize the world. All right. Matter of fact, the Romans renamed the people who were called Hellenists, or the people of Hellenes, or if we will, the Hellenites or the people of Yaman. They decided to call them Greeks. The people who were called Greeks didn't call themselves Greeks. You understand? So they definitely, the Romans, that is, was definitely about renaming things and so forth and so on. So we just want to point that out, say for edification purposes. Now, in this particular presentation, how Rome becomes important is because, did you know that in the catacombs, say throughout Europe, you would find Black images? This is pointed out inside a video on the channel, Moreh Yeshaya History Lessons, and what is referred to as archaeology, Israelites in archaeology. There's a video, I could post a link inside the description when this is uploaded regarding that. So we definitely do not want to minimalize the matter of what we're talking about and what we're presenting in this particular case. In this particular presentation, there will be some things that may be shocking to some. There may be some things that may be unbelievable to some, but I will cite the sources from which I derive the conclusions and the information from presented. All right, so without further ado, giving honor to Yah, let us continue in this presentation. Thank you. Black Egyptian, Black Hebrew. All right, now what we're looking at on the left-hand side comes from the source book called called Before the Mayflower by Laurent Bennett Jr. That's a picture of Queen Nefertari of ancient Egypt in Egypt's 18th dynasty. Now, for those who do know, all right, you had it to where they inside of that matter was in what they call in today's time the New Kingdom. And in this said New Kingdom, by this point, the Israelite exodus had already happened. What you're seeing portrayed on the right side comes from, brothers and sisters, the Israelites that was in Syria. All right, and their depiction of the Exodus in this particular case. So as we begin to see, if we will, we want to point this out, say with the laser pointer. This is from what they call the Temple of Europus. All right, and this is the Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt portrayed upon a wall there, and the people of the Egyptians being drowned within the sea with Moses and Aaron portrayed there. So we can begin to see, know, and understand that these people were not even in old artwork, what you call quote unquote Caucasians, or today's terminology as whites. All right, so the Hebrews were Black and the Egyptians were Black. So this is just something we want to point out in that particular case. Next slide, please. All right, Black Asiatics in Egypt. Now, what you're looking at there, brothers and sisters, comes from the era of Ramses II. Ramses II, brothers and sisters, like the one that we showed before with Nefertari, comes from what they call today times as the New Kingdom of Egypt. What you're seeing portrayed, some people have actually stated this is the Hebrew patriarch Joseph. I would not say yes to that. I will not say no to that. But one thing we definitely do know is that the horses, as we see shown here, was introduced to ancient Egyptians by the Amu. Now, for those who are interested or those who do know, The Amu is the Egyptian terminology for the people today called Asiatics. And that's what we see in both pictures. All right. So, not trying to be funny, you could begin to sit there and see how the man's beard is and so forth and so on. Ancient Egyptians were not really known for having thick beards in many, many cases. All right. So the Asiatics more so were known for such. I would like to take a time to show and read from a secular source, if you will, concerning this particular subject and concerning this particular matter. All right. And in this book right here. All right. This book is called Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times. And it's written by Donald Redford. All right. And in this book right here, we're going to see what this particular person states about the particular Amu or the Asiatics. All right. And it says the following on page 29 in this book, right? We may describe the typical Asiatic man in the early 3rd millennium BC as bearded with a long braided hair confined by a fillet and falling behind the ears. So what are we saying in this particular case? All right, there's been other presentations shown how the Assyrians showed the Israelites, which would be part of the Amu or the Asiatics, with what we call cornrows of today. All right, with a fillet. Now, a fillet is something that you just wrapped around your head and made a tie and it falls behind your ears. So even some of the hairstyles was different, though they were all black people, between different nations, such as that was of the Levant and the what they call Western Asia, and the people, brothers and sisters of the Egyptians, which was Northeast Africa. So these are things we just want to point out for reason purposes. Oh, excuse me about that. I was drinking this and had a little bit of ice in it. So let us go on, if you will, to the next slide. Thank you so much. Hyksos aspect Canaan. Now, what you're looking at here on the left-hand side, where the laser pointed at, is from the Egyptian tomb of Kemunhotep, which goes all the way back to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, which is before the era of the New Kingdom of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom of Egypt and the New Kingdom of Egypt is divided by what they call one of the intermediate periods. All right, the second intermediate period, correct me if I'm wrong. So we just want to point that out for reasonable purposes. Now, in this, you begin to sit there and see, brothers and sisters, all right, that the man is shown with a certain type of garment, if we will, which was not typical, say, of the Egyptians, if you will. And this is not to sound funny or anything of that kind of sort. I would like to stand up from where I'm at, because to show the kind of garment, if we will, if it can be seen, brothers and sisters, it basically came down to a certain point upon the man, basically in many cases past the groin area. So looking at it like that, and if we remember, brothers and sisters, when Saul was seeing who he understood, and when Samuel was made to be brought up from the dead, that's a whole other subject. When we go into the book of 1 Samuel 28, the witch of Endor said that I see a man with a robe on, with a long robe on. So you begin to see already how the people in those ancient days dressed, even being shown with that. When you go in the book of Exodus, it says that the Israelites were not to have an altar that is to be approached by steps, so one's nakedness may not be seen, would seem to look up, say whoever the Kohen or the priest would be. So we right there, brothers and sisters, can begin to see in that particular manner what we're talking about as far as how the people dressed, as far as how the people looked, and so forth and so on. All right, what we're seeing right here, brothers and sisters, comes from an archaeology book, and this is what they saying is the ancient Canaanite people. Now, I want to sit there, and this is not trying to play games or anything of that sort, if we will, right? If we notice, brothers and sisters, the features of said person upon the face, if we will, is that said of, quote, black people, what they call protruding lips and broad or wide nose and so forth, in many cases, slanted eyes. All right, so this is just something we want to point out, if we will, for edification purposes. When me and my lady was in Egypt, we actually saw the actual Sphinx where they actually broke off the nose and tried to chip off the lips. You understand? So what was they trying to do? Whether it be the Arabs who did it or Napoleon who did it, what were you trying to do by trying to erase this kind of matter? You understand? So these presentations, as was done last night with the brothers Zakar Ben Dan, we don't want minimalists to sit there and, quote, feel comfortable, while at the same token, those who are seeking the truth about information, it is a two-edged sword that we are presenting on this particular channel. One is not going to sit there and be okay being a minimalist. Two, those who are not minimalists, we want to sit there and show why we're saying what we're saying. Now, it is the Shabbat. How does this relate with the Shabbat? It's two reasons and two cases. One, it's about presenting truth in the earth. That could be done any day. Because it is the Shabbat, I'm not going to be up there showing my books and asking for Cash App inside of the comments and so forth and so on. Nonetheless, it says that the truth of the Most High will come from the earth in Psalms, or pardon me, the truth will come from the earth, sorry. And we know good and well with the intro of this, talking about Rome, right? In Daniel chapter 8, when it talks about the goat being, as is pointed out there, the king of Greece, which is Yawan in Hebrew, right? Brothers and sisters, it says that the truth was cast down to the ground when the Greek Empire came up. So looking at the said Old Testament in the book of Psalms, chapter 119, it says, thy Lord is the truth. So if the Greeks come up in later on in prophecy in Daniel chapter 8, and are noted from the future from that point to cast the truth to the ground, the Greek culture was trying to cast down the truth of the Torah to the ground, or the Torah being the truth, the Greeks wanted to cast it to the ground. You understand? So then you get all kind of different ideologies that spring up after the Torah was cast down to the ground. So if it says in Psalms 85 that the truth will come from the earth, we want to sit there and bring this out for edification purposes. All right. So just as much as the Tanakh talks about the Canaanites over 200 or so times, Egypt and the Egyptians over 400 or so times, we want to sit there and show what our people were looking at in the ancient world. What were ancient Israelites looking at, and how they did not derive any kind of racial epithet saying somebody's bubble lips, or somebody got a broad nose, or somebody is swarthy and therefore dirty, like Judaic or Jewish principles goes. So these are things you just want to point out for evidence purposes. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. All right, now, Hyksos aspect 2. As we pointed out, brothers and sisters, in this particular one right here, right, the matter of the Hyksos going into Egypt was in two ways. I wanted to mention that. That is, brothers and sisters, the era in Dynasty 11 and then later on in Dynasty 13. Now, brothers and sisters, in ancient Egypt, this is something to be noted, and that is Dynasty 13, 14, 15, pardon me, sorry about that. Dynasty 13 is what I present is when the Exodus happened. So now in Dynasty 14, 15, 16, and 17 was all at the same time in different parts of the country. You understand? Dynasty 15 and 16 was in northern Egypt or lower Egypt. Dynasty 14 and 17 was in southern Egypt or upper Egypt, because the way the Egyptians saw it, what was truly southern Egypt, they referred to it as upper, and what was, brothers and sisters, lower or northern Egypt, they referred to as lower because of the flow of the Nile. So we just want to point that out for edification purposes. All right. So looking at this in this particular case here, this is as stated from the tomb of Kemunhotep, all right? And this is dated to Dynasty 12. So if they were shown in Dynasty 12 coming in, that means they definitely had to have been in there by the time 13, 14, and so forth comes in for them to have any kind of rule, all right? So these are things we want to point out. Now, the people who were called Hyksos in Egyptian was referred to as Haku Soswet, which means rulers of foreign lands. Some people say rulers of mountainous lands. You understand? Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, these people in history did not call themselves Hyksos. No more, as pointed out earlier, the people called Greeks called themselves Greeks. So we have to know that bywords were very common in the ancient world. So what we want to point out is what legacy did the people called Hyksos say of themselves? Because we know about the stela of Amos of Dynasty 18, and then we know later on of the statement of Hatshepsut that she stated concerning the Amu or the Asiatics. You understand? But nonetheless, we definitely want to point out too that some of these Asiatics that the Amu is referred to as were also biblically some of the Hamites. There were Hamites that were referred to as Asiatics. You understand? Last time we spoke about Hammurabi and linguistics and so forth, like S and SH being interchangeable depending upon the language. And we want to point out that M and N is interchangeable depending upon the language. We also want to point out, brothers and sisters, that B and P is interchangeable depending upon the linguistics. So when you speak about what they refer to, say in the 1800 something BCE, what they would call the Code of Hammurabi, brothers and sisters, as pointed out in another presentation, means Ham the Great. Rab means great. Like in Assyria, Rab Saris or Rab Shakeh. The word Rab, just like in Hebrew, when we say what? Todah Rabbah. The word Rab is the masculine form, Rabbah being a feminine form, and it means much or great. All right. So in light of that, brothers and sisters, we want to point out, if we will, for reasonable purposes, that Hammurabi or Hammurapi, brothers and sisters, means Hamu the Great or Ham the Great. And this is over in northern Iraq, if we will. All right. So that is in what you call Western Asia, and these were Hamites in the ancient world there. All right. So these things we just want to emphasize on. So let's get back. All right. Remember the Hyksos aspect in Canaan. All right. And then we want to sit there and speak, if we will. All right. I want to say, pardon me, I want to show, that is, with the laser pointer, right? The aspect of this garment here, the Hyksos aspect too. Now, again, this is, brothers and sisters, the matter of the tomb of Kemunhotep. Now, Kemunhotep was a vizier for one of the pharaohs, that is to say, Senusrit II of Dynasty 12 of Egypt. All right. And looking at it like that, we could begin to see that these people shown there are already grown. These people there may have been blood related or not. Nonetheless, they were nationalistically related and definitely politically related. So in light of that, these people had parents. Why do I emphasize that these people shown in the picture had parents? Is because one of the things they try to come against Israelites with is saying that there's no Hebrew existence before the 10th century BCE. But brothers and sisters, whoever wrote the first known Hebrew writing in the 10th century BCE had already been able to speak, because people speak before they write. This is why babies are able to talk, though they're still human, even before they know how to write. So we just want to point out, while we talk about archaeology, history, and linguistics, we don't want to sit there and lose the concept of logic and common sense. And getting back into this particular case, the Hyksos aspect too, and how the garment would have looked in this particular matter, and how it's shown in the tomb of Kemunhotep, and not trying to play the race or the color game. You see how they look there, and then you see them in a different kind of complective kind of form. Now, this is not to say, and I say this in due respect, those who know or see me know that I am a brown-skinned brother. I remember, and I say this in no disrespect, I was asked by a light-skinned brother one time, so will I say that the Hyksos were black or white? And looking even at the older picture of the Hyksos and the, quote, revised picture of the Hyksos, and me coming from the womb of a light-skinned woman, my mother, may she rest in peace, was what you would call light-skinned. I definitely had to just look and say that, brother, my mother was the same complexion, or you're the same complexion as my mother. And you see me. See, the Willie Lynch concept of the dark versus the light and the light versus the dark has even crept into consciousness, quote unquote, to where they're like, oh, that's too dark, or that's too light, or something like that. There is a book called Lost Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Philosophers by Louis Rappaport. And one of the things that he stated about the Beta Israel, the so-called Philosophers, he actually tries to say that some of them are real dark and then some of them are brown skinned. And I'm sitting up there reading this like, is this dude really serious? So when we can see the Willie Lynch concept, whether Willie Lynch was a real person or not, we can begin to see that when it says of that statement being made in 1712 in Jamestown, Virginia, or in Virginia. Make sure that you teach this. Make sure that your children use this. And so you begin to sit there and see it when they try to play that game of the dark skin and light skin matter, and so forth and so on. So we're going to go on to the next slide, remembering how the Hyksos work. Now, kente cloth. Now, in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 37, we see this in the Hebrew. Where Yisrael ahab et Yosef, Mekal banayo, ki ben zekunim hu, lo, wa asa lo ketonet pasim. The translation. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Now, brothers and sisters, let's look at this, if we will. Sorry about that. The word ketonet, as we see here, we want to sit there and show this with the highlighter. Ketonet, right? That's the word that's there translated as the word coat, if we will, brothers and sisters. Now, I want to linguistically, while we talk about this kind of matter, point something else out, if we will. All right? And that is this. I'm going to highlight, again, showing that there, that tau in the red shows it to be a feminine, because the letter tau is a feminine letter. All right? So looking at it, say, in this particular case, Joseph was loved by Israel more than his brothers because of Joseph being born during the era when Jacob was old. Now it says here, ketonet pasim. One of the things we want to point out is that this kirik yod mem, if we will, right, shows it in this case, yes, to be is plural. The word pas, brothers and sisters, we want to show in a different color to get into the lingual matter, if we will, right? And in here, okay, I see what I'm gonna have to do with this. Go to the eraser and erase that, and then redo it, right? Highlighter. The word pas, brothers and sisters, means stripe. All right. And in this particular case, we begin to sit there and see stripe, 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 stripes. So if it's a coat of many colors in the English, we already know good and well, brothers and sisters, seeing, brothers and sisters, the Asiatics, the Amu, the people from the area of the Levant, where they would have been, how they would have been dressed as. And we see it here with the situation, say, with Joseph, if we will, brothers and sisters. Now, of course, this shows the brothers that Joseph was being given a position of title over them by giving this kind of garment. And if we remember, their jealousy caused them to, one of the things they did was they took Joseph's coat of many colors. So they wanted to strip him of what their father already gave him. You understand? Because they knew the significance of this. The brother Zion Lex, Abdiel Levy, on his channel, maybe say 2 or so weeks ago, did a presentation about the kente cloth in one of his teachings, and he pointed out that one of the scholars was saying that when this was worn, it was worn by people of royalty. All right. So this is something we definitely want to point out, say, for edification purposes. So again, you can sit there and check out that channel, Zion Lex TV on YouTube. And there's a video, say, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, round off in time, where it speaks about the kente matter and so forth. All right. So let's look at that. And then let's go into this here. Kente cloth part 2. And it says here in the Hebrew, right? And we want to go over this and show this, say, with the laser pointer. All right. And it says this. Ki king tal, pardon me. Ki king til bashna benot wa aleha ketonet pasim wa yotze ota hamelek haptulot me ilim wa na'al hadelet akareha Misharto Hachutz. Now, it says here, now she had a garment of many colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. And his servant brought her out and bolted the door after her. Now, let's look at this. This comes, brothers and sisters, from the book of 2 Samuel, all right, chapter 13, if we will, for edification purposes. Now, we want to show here Ketonet Pasim in this manner here, showing with the highlighter, all right, looking at it there. And it's the same wording, brothers and sisters, all right, as in the matter when we went over here in the book of Genesis, Ketonet Pasim. All right, so as it's translated in Genesis 37, so is it translated in the book of 2 Samuel, as here it says what? If we will, brothers and sisters. Now she had a garment of many colors upon her. One of the things we want to point out is that the daughters of Israel were not noted for showing their nudity, as was shown, and this is no disrespect upon the culture, like the Egyptian women of the line of Ham in that particular case. When you go, for instance, into the papyrus 55001, that really gets into pornography of today, if you will. But one of the things we want to point out in this particular case, brothers and sisters, is that the aspect of women showing their nudity was not known among the daughters of Israel. All right. And so the king's daughters were apparelled in a certain kind of manner. When Saul committed suicide, one of the things that David said is that daughters of Israel lament over him who have clothed you with sackcloth, who clothed you with scarlet. So the men, even in Israel, is noted in the book of Exodus. One of the things a man is supposed to do for his wife is provide raiment. That is to say, bigadim or garments or so forth and so on. A simla, her dress. You understand the word simla meaning dress. So there's nothing wrong in that particular case. So this is not to try to play salesman again on Shabbat, but there are many sisters in Israel that make garments. There's nothing wrong with finding a sister that makes garments and getting your lady your dress or so forth and so on. You understand? That is a thing of respect. All right. The actual white garment that I'm wearing right now was bought by my lady for me. All right. So I want to give a shout out to Adonia, Canaan, as well as Bathsheba, as well as Dariahu. And if there's anybody else who's able to hear and care to comment, feel free to do so. All right. So wanted to point this out as it says that now she had a garment of many colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. So even if she became a married woman and by default eventually not a virgin, she changed her garments from being known in that particular case. I noticed when I was a child in the congregation Hashaba, correct me if I'm wrong, the women who were not married dressed different than the women who were married. Married women in the congregation dressed differently. All right. So these are just things, brothers and sisters, that we definitely want to point out for reasonable purposes. All right. So again, there are sisters in Israel that sell and make garments. You can go online after Shabbat or so and check it out. And we can keep that business among us as a people. Let's move on, please. All right. Me and my lady in Egypt in kente cloth. All right. So now going over this particular thing, I want to show, if we will, say with the laser pointer. They named this camel here Michael Jackson when we was in Egypt. And this camel that you see right here is actually, according to what we were told, was 5 years old. Now, they actually asked my lady to hold her arm out, as you see there, and had it the camera positioned as if she was actually holding the pyramid or her hand was on top of it. That's camera effects in that particular case. I did not get on a camel because after going into the pyramid of Malkare of Dynasty 4, I wasn't feeling my best per se. When I say that, I mean like my leg was hurting. You understand? So I didn't get on a camel, and I just rather walk the pain off from going up and down the steps inside the pyramid there. All right. And we actually, knowing ourselves as Israel, went there with a different spirit than maybe some others were going to Egypt with. Archaeology, history, this is where our ancestors traveled through and from and back through, as in the case with Jeremiah later on. And so these are things we just wanted to see for ourselves and so forth. All right, again, this camel, Hagamal, which is the Hebrew word for camel, is 5 years old. And the tour guide had me in the front. There's no way I was going to have, be they Ishmael or anything else, the Arabians in Egypt. There's no way I was, even if I wasn't getting on a camel, there was no way I was going to have my lady being escorted by 2 other men and I'm not there. That's just not Israel, for the lack of a better term, if we will. All right. So it wasn't a thing of being egotistical, but I definitely was not going to sit back and then have some dudes just take and have my lady on a camel and then just having her walk like that. No. And what am I getting at? When you're in a, this is sidebar, if we will, when you're in a relationship, you don't make yourself disconnected. You let your presence be known. All right, so this is just something we want to point out, sidebar, for reasonable purposes. Now, this is me, and the water that you see there is the Nile. All right, now, as we pointed out last week, the Nile was called the Etero by the Egyptians, and it was called the Yaor by the Hebrews. All right, it was called, as stated, Yaor by the Israelites. You see that in the book of Exodus. You see that in the book of Genesis before that. All right, so we just want to point that out. This is on a ship that was being manned by one of the tour guides and so forth and so on. And as noted and seen, like the people who was in Egypt shown here on the wall of Kemunhotep, later on, another person, in this case happened to be myself, shown dressed similar to that. Why do I want to emphasize that? Because many times they'll say that, okay, the Kente thing came out of Ghana, but the Kente thing went into Ghana by the people that was already from the Levant in the eastern part of Africa, northeastern Africa. All right, because the Akan, which is the ancestors of the Ashanti people, which are the ancestors of many of our brothers and sisters in Jamaica, by the way, where we get into this particular matter, they did not exist in, say, the 1800 something BCE as a tribe, but the people, the ancestors existed, who later on became those of Western Africa and then shipped over to the Americas via slavery. That garment did not originate in West Africa, though it's big there and it's not bad or whatever. But as we see, as shown, coat of many colors. All right. Now the word katonet means garment or covering. So we just want to point that out. So when we say coat, we don't want to have to sit back and think that it's like one of them big puff things from Burlington Coat Factory or something of that nature. But let us continue on in this particular case. All right. Black Persians, Black Minoans. Now, Persia, brothers and sisters, as I stated in my book, Egypt Talking Writing, was one of the last great Black empires of the world. Now, this is not, as stated in my book, Egypt Talking Writing, this is not to take away from the Nok Kingdom. I'm going to write that in there. All right. This is not to take away, brothers and sisters, from the Zah Dynasty. I'm going to write that in there. This is not to take away from the Kingdom of Mali. This is not to take away from the Kingdom of Ghana. This is not to take away, brothers and sisters, from the Kingdom of Songhai. You understand? But as far as a world empire, the Persians, certainly during the era of the Achaemenid matter, we're talking about Cyrus, we're talking about Darius, we're talking about Cambyses, we're talking about Cambyses later on in history, you're talking about Darius, this one, that one, and the third, and so forth and so on, were definitely people of color, if you will. All right, so just as much, and this is not to try to play the complexion or the game or whatever like that, we want to point something out. The hair being shown there to be long, say in that particular case, is no different then when sisters sit there and do that to their hair these days and times. But if they, quote, leave their hair alone, you'll begin to see go into what we call today of the Afro and so forth and so on, as we'll show. Remember Afro, because we're going to show that later in this presentation. All right. So the Minoans were from Europe. All right. And these were the people that were in the area where you call Greece or Italy of today. And they definitely were what you would call people of color. All right. So we just want to point that out, if we will. All right. Here we see the Etruscans. That was certainly before the Roman Empire came to be in what we call Italy of today. And this is how, brothers and sisters, they're shown and how they look. And then we see Sumer in Iraq, in this particular case there. Brothers and sisters, there is a popular thing going around saying that Black people want to sit there and make, quote, everything black. No, we don't want to sit there and, quote, make everything black. What we are attempting to do is bring out the suppressed truth that you see inside of caves, that you see inside of murals, that you see on walls, that you see in old archaeology. You understand? And though we do not condone idolatry in the house of Israel, one of the reasons, believe it or not, that they kept on bombing in Iraq is to sit there and try to hide information about how the people truly looked in that particular matter. They definitely wanted that to sit there and be suppressed. So while we have traveled in certain cases, studied certain books, read up on certain literature, we definitely don't want it to be minimalized about the people of us, our history, Black people throughout the world. Let's go on, if we will, in this particular presentation, how the Native Americans look. Now, this is guy here is Chief Straight Arrow. Now, I got this picture and I tried to sit there and take it from the TV to make it as clear as I could. And Amityville Horror, when you see this guy talking, you can see he would be today what you would call a Black man. So that Nez Perce looking that they have, the images of the sitting bull that they have, that is not to say that Native Americans didn't look different, just as much as people in Africa look different. But we do not want it to be thought of that there were no, say, in today's terminology, Black people that was among the indigenous of this land as well. So while we know good and well through prophecy and by the process of elimination that our people in America in many cases are from the East, it's scattered tribes of Israel, we do know and understand that there were people in this land here in North America that what you will call in today's terminology Black. All right. And so this is not to sit there and be disingenuous or disrespectful, nor do we want it to be thought, like many attempt to do sadly in this day and time, is replace the sad story of African American history with a proud story of Black Native indigenous history. Slavery did happen. The Atlantic slave trade did happen. Black people being in the Americas before the era of Gotham, who was working for Prince Henry the Navigator, and for the era before the era of Cabral, if we will, before Brazil was quote unquote said to be discovered in the year 1500 by the Portuguese. Brothers and sisters, there was already said people of color in this place here. And we know that from the record that's left by who America was named in honor of, Amerigo Vespucci. I want to, no, not plain salesman, but I want to read something out of this book here that I wrote. And in this book here, From Assyria to America, brothers and sisters, in the chapter that is called From Ghana to Georgia, there is something that I want to read in this particular case, if we will. All right? And it says as follows. Thank you. Amerigo Vespucci stated this: since the men were worn out from having been nearly a year at sea, and the ships were becoming dangerously unseaworthy, the crew cried out that they wished to return to Castile. Castile is in Europe. Therefore, we agreed to seize shiploads of inhabitants as slaves, and to load the ships with them and turn towards Spain. The people were without clothing, timid, and ignorant, and we did whatever we wished to them. America Vespucci, Pilot Major, written by Frederick J. Poole. So that is cited in this book here, From Assyria to America. And according to that, according to the record left by Amerigo Vespucci, brothers and sisters, that they took people that was indigenous of this land and brought them over to Spain, brought them over to Europe. All right. And in another writing from Amerigo Vespucci, he said that he saw people that were brown. He stated that the Europeans were white and the people, the indigenous, who they saw were brown. So these are things we want to point out for evidence purposes. All right. Next slide, please. How the natives looked that were in Mexico. Now, when we begin to look at this, some people have tried to state that that was black paint that they put upon themselves. Here's something that I would like to ask concerning that kind of theory, concerning this. Mexico is hot. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Why would people, anyone, put brown or black or dark paint on themselves, knowing that black attracts heat? And Mexico is dark. Pardon me, Mexico is hot. This comes from a magazine about the people that was with the Maya. So brothers and sisters, like stated, we definitely want to point this out and bring this information out for the people so they can pick what they want, if you will, because that's really what it boils down to. People going to pick what they want to study and research and understand and believe, for the lack of a better term. But one thing we definitely want to point out is that these people here, there is no way, shape, form, or fashion, while people in Africa put white paint on themselves due to the heat, why would anyone on this earth, Western Hemisphere or Eastern, put black or brown or dark paint on themselves due to the heat, when there are black people in Africa that put white paint on themselves to sit there due to the heat? See, they didn't perhaps think that somebody would think, and so these are just things that we want to point out for reference purposes, if we will. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. A book on the subject, Black Indians. I actually have this book by William Lawrence Katz. Now, the hatred of the black man is so permeated and so deep to where when people actually speak about this book, a white man wrote it. So let it be as it is. But there were people that were, as we've been pointing out, in this land, that what you will call black, and this book talks about it. Another book here, Unexpected Faces in Ancient America. So this goes, say, from Colombia all the way into other parts, where the people that were shown were definitely what we would today call people who were black. Now, while we have just pointed out what Amerigo Vespucci stated, according to the book written by Frederick Poole, that there were people brought over to Europe. And as this book, Black Indians, also point that out, for they who want to minimize the Atlantic slave trade going west, we have to sit back and ask this. If you are indigenous to this land, then you may want to sit there and go, like people in Ghana had the open door policy for Black Americans, for the lack of a better term, to go to Africa. Then this being your land, if you're saying you're autonomous, in other words, not from any other place, but indigenous, this direct place, and not from, quote, any ship, then you need to find out your ancestors, your people that was shipped east, even according to Amerigo Vespucci, and tell them to come back home if this is your true home. See, as pointed out before, the said African American is not your enemy. You understand? We didn't come over in ships and make treaties with the indigenous of this land here and then break them. The Caucasian did after kidnapping our ancestors. So black people, for the lack of a better term, I'm saying black people, such as myself, who say that we come from the lands of the East, please stop trying to make a beef with us. I have a DVD, and it's about Black Indians, if you will. And many of them were saying that they had paperwork that talked about them being from the Choctaw people. And I'm going to write that in here, all right, about coming from those particular people there. They're in like the Carolinas and Tennessee area and so forth and so on, right? And what I noticed in it is that they were saying Black Americans, you know, people like me, if you will, quote unquote, Black Americans, would be saying or do say that Black people claiming this land here as their own, talking about we were, quote, here already, are lying. That we would say that those people are lying. Well, one of the things we want to point out is that, again, we, the said African American, and those who saying that we come from the lands of the East, such as the Levant, we, as stated, didn't come over here and make treaties. So your land and your culture and your heritage, if it's over here truly in the West, you're wasting time making DVDs trying to talk about the Black man saying that we come out of Western Africa and then from Western Africa, from Northeast Africa and Western Asia. If we're saying we're not even from the United States of today in origin, and you're saying that you are, then you need to find your people that were shipped, according to Amerigo Vespucci, eastward and cause them to come back home. So these just one of the things to be pointed out, because you're wasting time arguing with a group of people such as myself, trying to debate with a group of people such as myself that say that we was already shipped over here from Western Africa. First being brought to places such as Barbados, broken as a slave, and then shipped over to Virginia. And those that were too rebellious, like one of the people that George Washington had in 1769, who shipped them from what is now the state, say, of Virginia, or from New York, one of the two places, to Barbados. So while claiming indigenous of this land, you don't want to sit there and forget the indigenous of Mexico that looked like that. You don't want to forget, brothers and sisters, the indigenous of Long Island that looked like the person that we see right there. So while they didn't make no distinction, you are making a distinction for whatever political or monetary reasons. We're not going to go too far into the aspect of treaties and people selling out. That's a whole other subject. But what we want to point out is stop trying to make an argument where the argument doesn't reside. All right, so let's go on, if you will, to the next slide and close out. Egypt, Cush, and Nubia. And when he had heard say unto Harka, king of Ethiopia, behold, he is come out to fight against thee. He sent messages again unto Hezekiah, saying, and this is from the Bible in the book of 2 Kings 19. All right, so looking at this, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, if we will, sorry about that. Right, we definitely want to get into this particular matter here. The Levant area that we've been talking about is this area that you see shown here. This is Memphis. Memphis is called Nof in the Bible. And it's written about in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 2. By the time Jeremiah the prophet comes along in history, which is after the era of Taharka and after the era of Hezekiah, the Egyptians were in their new kingdom, or the late period, actually, in Dynasty 26. Taharka that we see here, brothers and sisters, mentioned in the Bible in 2 Kings, is Dynasty 25. He was a Cushite that comes from the area over here in Ethiopia, brothers and sisters, but was ruling in Egypt. Now, because the Ptolemies were in Egypt, and because you had, correct me if I'm wrong, Abu Bakr and everything like that in the 7th century AD or CE that went into and tried to sit there and take control over Egypt with the Arabian or the Arab invasion of Egypt, if you will. They tried to make them look different, make them look different, make them look different. So because they couldn't say the same thing with Ethiopia, and they know that Taharqa was a Cushite in Ethiopian, they tried to now say that Dynasty 25 is the black pharaohs, as if Ramses of Dynasty 19 was not black, as if Akhenaten of Dynasty 18 was not black, as if Senusret of Dynasty 12 was not black, as if Namur of Dynasty 1 was not black. See, one of the things they try to play with the game when they start talking about quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to talk about how they try to manipulate that particular matter without mentioning the Persian, pardon me, not the Persian, but rather the Ptolemaic matter with the Greeks who were Caucasians, and the matter with the Arabs after they were already mixed in with the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So these are things we just want to point out for reference purposes. Now, getting back to this, again, brothers and sisters, King Hezekiah knew of Taharqa. And again, in the scriptures, you don't read none of those racial epithets, such as, oh, these people look so dark because of this. And so that's not part of the Tanakh. So let's not get the Talmud and Judaic things twisted with the Tanakh itself. All right. So let's go on, if we will, to the next part. The matter of Taharqa. And here we see an image of such with the nose broken off, because that's what they do. And then they still sit there and show it and so forth. When me and my lady was in Egypt, they actually showed a image of a person with the nose broken off. They have no shame in that particular case. Like, oh, we got disfigured. Let's sit up there and remove it. No, this is what we did. And just look at it. And it says here, the connection in politics, marriage, and other social forms of life was not strange between the Africans and the Hebrews. Unlike what some may think or teach, the fact is that Israelites were mistaken as Egyptians, and blacks in slavery were called both Jacobites and Ethiopians. Did you know that places such as in Haiti, they called Israelites, which we understand to be Israelites were the captives, they used to call them Jacobites? That's something you may want to sit there and get into for a particular matter and study. Now, looking at it like this, when you go again back into the book Before the Mayflower by Laurent Bennett Jr., the people who were brought over here were called Ethiopian. Now, we know that at the end, or from the Greek term, means burnt face. All right. So now when you go say into the record of Tacitus, I want to write this out here, if we will. And I pointed this out in the book I wrote, Egypt Talking Writing. Tacitus of Rome, who was a Roman historian, he stated that in his day, the people of Rome believed, all right, that the Hebrews, or quote unquote, they said the Jews, were a people of Ethiopian origin. I remember conversing with someone about that, and they try to say, well, see, the Romans believed it. That means that they could have been anything. No, Caucasian man, stop trying to fit yourself into certain things, because I remember, as stated, the conversation where I cited Tacitus. So if the Romans had never met the people of the Levant area, as we see in this area here, all right, really until, say, after the time where Pompey of Rome and the people in Tacitus era was saying that the Hebrews are from Ethiopia, that was their belief. The fact that that was their belief showed that they had to look like the people who were called Ethiopian or burnt face, because that's how they define many peoples. So we cannot, brothers and sisters, try to sit there and play that game like that in that particular case. And this is not to be, quote, racial or anything of that sort. But when you look at Caucasians inside a kente cloth, it just don't look right. It don't blend with them. It don't flow with them like that, you know, once it comes down to that. And so people could wear what they want to wear, but just wanted to point that out for reason purposes, if we will. All right, let's go on to the next part. Upper and Lower Egypt. This is what we was talking about before. Upper Egypt is Southern Egypt, And if we look at over here, this is what they refer to as Lower Egypt. All right. I want to, brothers and sisters, to collaborate with something that we spoke about last week. All right. The highlighter here, if we look here at Avaris, where the Israelites was at, if we will, during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, we spoke about the existence of the Israelites being in Egypt very heavily and so forth and so on. All right. And so now when we look at Memphis, brothers and sisters, it is called in the Bible Noth, and inside the Egyptian it is referred to as Menofer. If we understand that Avaris is Tel El Dab'a, also known in ancient times as Rawati, you understand, also known as Peru Nefer, we begin to see exactly where the Israelites were in this particular case. All right, so brothers and sisters, when me and my lady was in Egypt, they was going to give us a tour all the way down here into the Saqqara, but we wound up not taking that in that particular case. There is a lot of history that is still prevalent in this earth to be uncovered. So we definitely want to point this out for reasonable purposes. All right, now, there was a presentation that I did called The Madness of Saying That the Land of Israel is in the West. In Ezekiel, in the Bible, chapter 30, it speaks about brothers and sisters all the way down to Cush. From Egypt down to Cush. If you're seeing the Western Hemisphere and lands, or the lands in the Western Hemisphere, is where the true land of Israel is and the true land of Jerusalem is, you're going to have to show where Cush is as well. Because the Bible talks about Egypt and Cush. And when we start talking about Upper Egypt, that is the beginning where it goes into, say, the matter of Nubia, if we will, brothers and sisters, going right into Cush. I want to emphasize upon this here too, and I'm going to circle it, if we will. I'm going to highlight this while we talk about the house of Israel, and we want to show with the pen and circle this. This is in Upper Egypt, right? So while we're talking about that, in that particular case, right, Upper Egypt being in Southern Egypt, Elephantine. Elephantine was called Yeb inside of the Egyptians by their own name for it. All right. I want to read something from a secular source, if we will, brothers and sisters, in this particular case. All right. And this is what I wanted to read from. All right. Ancient Egypt by Lorna Oakes and Lucia Garland. And regarding what this says here concerning Elephantine, let us see what it says while we show it on the map as we go over this particular case. Thank you for bearing with me with this. All right. In this book, brothers and sisters, regarding Elephantine, let's see what it says in this. All right. Want to get to the correct page. Thank you for bearing with me with that. Now, it's entitled here Jewish Synagogues and Temples. And let's see what it says here. Elephantine. A small community of Jews also existed at Elephantine. They and their temple are known from Aramaic papyri of the 5th century BC. The temple of Yahweh was in existence before the invasion of Egypt in 525 BC by the Persian king Cambyses, but its precise location is not known. The papyri revealed that in 410 BC, the priests of the nearby temple of Khnum, which is one of the Egyptian gods, persuaded the local government in the absence of the Persian satrap, the provincial governor, to attack and destroy the temple of Yahweh. Now, I've talked about the Egyptian matter with that and the Israelites in Elephantine, and we're showing Elephantine on a map. Now, as stated, just shown in this book here, Ancient Egypt, right? It talks about that on page 257 in that book. I would like to take the time out again, brothers and sisters, and show the matter with Elephantine, if we will, brothers and sisters, from another source. Because yes, we are Israelites and we want to show that we fit in history. This is not something like some Kemetic brothers and sisters, the Israelites wrote themselves into history. No, it wasn't us writing ourselves into history. It's the fact that we are written in history. All right. So I would like to go over this particular matter, if we will, for edification purposes. All right. Elephantine. All right. Thank you for that. And what this says concerning that particular matter, if we will. All right. In the history of what went down and what happened. Thank you for being with me with the time. Because we want to show what we're talking about for edification purposes. Here it is on page 49. Sorry for that. I should have had the page already noted. And here is the citation. This book here, and I'm going to read the citation, is called, all right, and I actually got this book in New York, Atlas of Ancient Egypt by Baines and Malek. And here is what it says. Elephantine, colony of Jewish mercenaries in Persian service in the 5th century, with a temple to Yahweh, disappeared after 401, meaning after 401 BCE. Now, why does that point become important? And as we read in the book by Lorna Oakes called Ancient Egypt, about how the Israelites, which was later on sadly called Jews and so forth, how they was inside of Elephantine Egypt in this particular case. Brothers and sisters, why does that become important to us of biblical studies? Because it says in Jeremiah 2 that they that are on Noth feed upon the crown of your head, talking about the Israelites. So now let us look at this and show what we're talking about, if we will say with the laser pointer. Noth, brothers and sisters, is the biblical Memphis. When we read of No, N-O, that is the biblical word for Thebes, and the Egyptians called Thebes Waset. So how does all of this tie into the history with the Israelites, as we pointed out from showing sources talking about the Aramaic papyri and the Israelites that was around then? How then, brothers and sisters, is people saying that the Israelites never existed? One. Secondly, how are they going around saying that the land of Israel is over here in the West? Ancient records show that to not be the case. So let's just go on and continue on in this case. The Jahi set you as sea peoples. Now, I pointed out, and they're stated with reason, in the book that I wrote, Egypt Talk and Writing, one of the people of the sea peoples was called the Denyen. All right? And I want to write this in here for reasonable purposes. Den Yen. I stated in my book that the Denyen people were the tribe of Dan as part of the sea peoples of the Israelites. In the Bible, in Judges chapter 5, in the Song of Deborah, it says, Dan, why does he dwell in ships? So now while we talk about, quote, the sea peoples, it was not far-fetched to say that there were no Israelites among that, knowing that the Danites in the era of the Judges, which is less than 40 years after the timing of Joshua, which is certainly 200 plus years before the timing of Solomon, and the ships that he had going out from Ezion-Geber, which went all the way as far as the British Isles, which is another subject for another time. We want to point out that definitely that it does stand to reason that the people of the sea peoples, in part called the Den Yen, would definitely can be identified for more than one reason as the biblical tribe of Dan. Now, let's look at this picture right here as we noted. This is said to be a Philistine. The Philistines, as we pointed out last week in the book of Amos, were from the Hamitic Egyptian line, but was living in Kaftor, which was an island or is an island in the Mediterranean. When me and my lady flew into Egypt, we actually saw the Mediterranean Sea as pointed out. Now, looking at it in this particular case, if we will, the Philistines were looking like this. This is why we want to point this out for reasonable purposes. So the people that Samson saw, Samson's wife Delilah, her relative and nation people look like that. Delilah was not a white woman, for the lack of a better term. And they were not crossing colors, certainly in that matter. So the Israelites were definitely, as we want to emphasize, were not writing inside of the records of their own book racial epithets against people of color. If anything, in the scriptures, it talks about, brothers and sisters, if there be a white rising in one's skin, and the hair thereof be turned yellow, then that person shall be called unclean. That person has leprosy. That is in Leviticus chapter 13. So it's not black people or brown skin or dark skin people that is the bad thing in the old world. If anything, the Caucasians will be considered lepers. If anything, it would have to be isolated from society when you go into the book of Leviticus. So these are things that we don't want to sit there and try to be portrayed as, quote, racial or racist, but we definitely want to point it out that no, the Israelites were people of color and were used to being around a said people of color, be they light skin of today or dots. Let's go in, if we will, to the next slide. Thank you. Merneptah still, in part, says this: the princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Desolation is Tehenu. Hati is that pacified. Plundered is the Canaan. Carried off is Ashkelon. Israel is laid waste. His seed is not. Now, we went over the Merneptah still last time we did this presentation, or the presentation we did from last week, right? But I wanted to go over something about this. It says the princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Desolation is Tehenu. This is from the Merneptah still. So now, this is no disrespect intended to John Henry Clark. One of the things in a nutshell that John Henry Clark tried to state, or did state in his book, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, is that African nations were not really about war heavily. And like I stated, this is no disrespect to the former scholar who is now deceased, John Henry Clark, and what he stated, such as saying that African nations, black nations in Africa, were not very much into heavy with war. When we know about the Egyptians cutting off the right hand of the people whom they defeated, when we know about the war that happened with the Hyksos, and a matter with Sekenre of Dynasty 17, when they took an axe and split his head open in part. So we definitely want to point this out for reference purposes. It says here, as part of his triumph stele, if you will, the princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Desolation is Tehenu. Tehenu is today Libya, all right, which is west of Egypt. Hati, which is the Hittites in ancient Turkey, all right, is that pacified. Plundered is Canaan. All right, so I remember one time there were some Israelite brothers speaking with Kemetic brothers, and they were saying, well, where's Canaan at? Read your records if you're claiming the people or the science of ancient Kemet, if you will, because the ancient Egyptians did know of the Canaanites. And it goes on to say, we showed how the Canaanites looked earlier. All right, carried off is Ashkelon. Ashkelon is where later on one of the peoples of the Philistines lived in. That's one of their cities. Did you know that the tribe of Dan also lived by Ashkelon? and that Delilah being a Philistine and Samson being a Danite, all right, were in close proximity in location. So it's not too hard to figure out what we're talking about for reasonable purposes. Then it goes on to say, Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. We already went over that last week in the presentation. So we're not going to spend very, very much time going over that in that case. But we did want to point out that the ancient nations was about that war. So let's go on, if we will, to the next part, if we will. All right, inside the museums in Egypt. Now, who you see there is a picture of Merneptah. Now, when me and my lady did see that, they didn't allow us to take pictures inside the museum. So this is something that I got from online. The same museum, brothers and sisters, shows this thing spins around and it goes around and around, and it shows how the ancient Egyptians looked and everything like that. They were not Caucasian. And this is a picture of me in a white garment inside of the Egyptian museum next to the Merneptah stele. So as we see here, this is part of the translation of the Merneptah stele, and this is a picture my lady took of me right here while we was in Egypt by the Merneptah stele or stela. So we want to point that out. Now, Flinders Petrie in the late 1800s is the one who found this Merneptah stele. All right, so let us understand that for reasonable purposes, if we will. All right, so this is a museum in Egypt, and we're going to show, let's go on to the next part. All right, from the era of Pinot and me at the museum. Now, this is me again at the museum. We was there 2 different times. Thus, you see me in one outfit there. That is the Kente matter. We was there with our tour guide, and my lady took the picture. And then this one is when me and my lady went back to that museum while we was in Egypt without our tour guide. All right, so looking at it like that, this Pinot, this dates, brothers and sisters, to the era of Ramses, all right, which takes you into, brothers and sisters, the new kingdom of Egypt, as it's called in timeline of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. Now, these people are shown as people of color. They did not portray themselves looking Caucasian. And one of the things to point out is that be it the Arabs in the 9th or 10th century AD or CE, or be it Napoleon in the era, brothers and sisters, less than 300 or so years ago, with them trying to sit there and get rid of the black images, they still love them enough to try to sit there and still show them deformed in statues. They didn't break the statues according to the laws of the Torah that we should not have statues. That was not their main point of focus. Their main point of focus was to hide something black. And so this is something we want to point out, if we will, for edification and reasonable purposes. As you can see, I'm going to have to start to charge this. Bear with me 1 second. Thank you, my brothers and sisters and elders, for that. All right. We'll put this in there so that way we can have this beginning to save to charge, if we will. All right. So let us go on, if we will, to the next part. Me and my lady in Egypt at the museum. All right. National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. That's the museum that we was in, where, brothers and sisters, this was. This museum where you see me in a white garment is not the museum that we was just talking about. All right. So there were 2 different museums that me and my lady went to. All right. The Merneptah stele is not inside the museum that we see here. All right. So National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. All right. And shout out to my lady, Sarah Makela of the tribe of Judah. She is there shown holding my book, supporting what the brother is about. And that's me in a blue garment. All right. And it was peace when we was in there. We definitely was in there. And knowing ourselves as Israel, we knew right from wrong in many, many cases. Me and my lady in Egypt at the museum. Now, this is just showing the museum itself, and this is us. The tour guide that we had took our picture in that case. Let's go on, if we will, to the next part, please. All right, now, remember we talked about Libya? Inside of the Merneptah stele, right? In translation in part, we see this as pointed out. The princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Desolation is Tehenu. This Tehenu is Libya or Libu. All right. So Libya is Tehenu in the Stela or the steel or whatever. So while that is there, this is the people, how they looked that Meneptah was talking about. Now we know good and well that Egypt and Libya is in northern Africa, but they want to portray this concept of sub-Saharan Africa. But we already see, brothers and sisters, be you call them Moors, be you call them Meshresh, Libu, or Berbers, ancient Libyans looked like that. And then we see a fragment from the mortuary temple of Ramses II depicting a Libyan. Brothers and sisters, these people have what you would call Negroid features of today. Why do we want to point this out for reasonable purposes? Is because they want to sit there and have this suppressed by even refer to it as, oh, that's sub-Saharan Africa. So as if Black people was not in Northern Africa, which we know, brothers and sisters, was not the case. We was all over the earth, actually. But we just want to point this out for reasonable purposes. And here we see Israelites. As we pointed out before, remember, I was saying, remember the Afro? Now, looking at the Afro here, this is from the mural of the era of Solomon depicted in Ethiopia of today. Here we see the Israelites shown, brothers and sisters, bow down, namely from the tribe of Judah, with the Afro, coarse-like Afro hair. Do we know what naps are? Naps are tight curls. It's not even to be insulting or anything like that. So this is just something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. All right, this goes back, that we see here where the laser pointer is at. That goes back, brothers and sisters, to the era of the 8th century BCE. This is before the time of the Israelites in Elephantine, but which was after the Exodus. So we want to show the correlation in time and history. All right, and let us go in here. Egypt and Byblos. Under the kings of the 12th dynasty, Egypt once more became a highly organized, well-administered country with prosecuted policies in respect to Nubia, Libya, and Western Asia. There were co-regencies. Now, brothers and sisters, under the kings of the 12th dynasty is the Middle Kingdom. The 12th dynasty is when the Hyksos were being shown in Egypt, as we've shown earlier. Do you see how all of that history begins to tie in that particular case? With Libya, which is west of Egypt, Western Asia, in the area here, we're going to show, brothers and sisters, in this, sorry about that, that we're going to show here with the pin, all right? This is the Western Asia. Now, why too did I sit there and go over Egypt and Byblos? Because you read about Byblos inside of the writings of the Apera Papyrus. We went over the Apera Papyrus inside the book I wrote, Egypt Talking Writing, as well as in presentations. So the Egyptians were definitely aware of the geography of the area around them, as were the Israelites. So looking at it, brothers and sisters, again with the laser pointer, Egypt and Byblos, the sea peoples that we talked about was in the Mediterranean Sea. We already pointed out that Deborah in Judges chapter 5 was saying, Dan, why doth he dwell in ships? So it's not, again, too hard to figure out how this history correlates one with another. So when we begin to look at this current map, right, we see this is the Levant area, Jordan. On the east side of where Jerusalem was is where the tribe of Gad, Manasseh, and Reuben was. I want to give a shout out to my brother Masada Yisraala. You understand? Definitely an Israelite brother that I've been speaking to, not to expose people's business or anything about going into the land of Israel in the future, but definitely you just want to give due respect where it's due. And brothers and sisters, looking at it in this particular case, you're not going to sit there and show that these people in Egypt were in ancient times black and then they were white over here as Israelites. No, such was not the case. Even with it being colonized by the Arabs, somebody pointed out by saying, okay, Arabs are called brown of today, right? So Egypt brown, Libya brown, Sinai brown, Syria brown, and white over here with the Jewish men? No, absolutely not. You got into that land with the Balfour Declaration after the matter with Theodore Herzl. So one of the things we definitely want to point out is we want to emphasize what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right, so let's not get in our negative feelings and talk about, oh, anti-Semitic. Let's not even try to go there. When I remember having to bring up to a teacher that our lips are not big for lying. So let's go in, if you will, to the next part, please. Assyria and Israelites, the Lachish matter, the city in Judah in the 8th century BCE. Now, you can see the course-like hair as well as the full beard as the Asiatics were described as. And even while going in captivity, they had on a long garment, if you will. All right, so these are things we just want to point out for reasonable purposes. All right, this is from the matter during the era of Sennacherib. Sennacherib of Assyria had war with Taharka that we spoke of Egypt. And Hezekiah was in the middle of all of that. So you have Sennacherib versus the Egyptians at one point with Taharka. And Hezekiah of Judah was in the mix of all of that. Sennacherib spoke about Hezekiah, and we'll get into that next week. So we just want to point that out for reasonable purposes. Let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Here I wanted to show a closer aspect. This is coming from the book Ancient Hebrews by Gert Muller. You may want to look that up after the Shabbat. And here we see the wall of Lachish, where the Israelites are shown portrayed going into captivity and how they looked in this particular case. All right, they were not even portrayed with what you call Caucasian or Caucasoid features, if you will. All right, here we have Aramean and Syrian. And brothers and sisters, these people are shown as that. The Arameans were called Syrians by the Greeks. When you go to the book of Josephus, it talks about that. So brothers and sisters, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. Thus concludes this particular presentation. I thank the people who subscribe to the channel, who's watching the video, like, comment, and share. And most I bless you all. Have a beautiful Shabbat. Please subscribe as stated to the channel. 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we intend to do a Hebrew class regarding the Hebrew in Leviticus chapter 6 on this channel. So with that, I say, due respect on a human level to my lady who encourages me to do these things, and to the brothers and sisters. Dora, if you're hearing this, my brother, Dora Yahu Ben Dora, call me, Ak. Call me at the number that I'm going to post here, because I've been promising that we're going to do an interview together for years. I've been saying that, literally. So 908, right? 587-4841. Now that I'm able to sit there and think the Most High know how to work it to where I can have me and someone else speaking and we can do an interview. It's not just me and me on the channel like that. I definitely want to respectfully take advantage of being able to interview and be interviewed. All right. So give me a call, brother. All right. I know we've been talking for years, at least 3 years online, talking about, yeah, we're going to hook up, we're going to study together and so forth and so on as brothers and as men. But give me a call, 908-587-4841 for reasonable purposes. All right. Thus concludes this, giving a shout out to the brothers of my tribe, Dan, Zarkar ben Dan, as well as Morin Yiftach of the tribe of Dan. All right? We want to continue with interviews. So let's continue on that. Most I bless. Shalom. Have a good night.